Thank you very much, Dr. Azam, distinguished speakers, presenters, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin wa salatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah, I'm very grateful to be given this opportunity to be here at IAIS to share some views with regards to the topic of the seminar. And I'd like to extend my appreciation and gratitude also to the organizer, IAIS, for this invitation. Now, the theme of the seminar is on Islam and green technology. But for the purpose of my session, I'd like to focus more on green practices. Because from my point of view, if we were to talk about green technology and yet we do not have any awareness on green practices, it will not come to, we will not get the desired results. So I think it is important for us to be aware that there is a need for us to inculcate green practices in our lives. And if we were to think about it, many of these practices are very much encouraged in Islam, and it has been practiced in our community for so long, and yet when we are faced with the rapid pace of modernization, we seem to forget about this. We seem to have put this aside, and it is no longer part of our lives. Okay, I'll start with a few definitions. Okay, green practices are essentially practices that can lead to more environmentally friendly and ecologically responsible decisions and lifestyles, which can help protect the environment and sustain its natural resources for current and future generations. Essentially, some of these things were mentioned by Mr. Rafi earlier on. And then I would also like to focus in this presentation on renewable energy, or some people call it green energy. Any energy resource that is naturally regenerated over a short time scale and derived directly from the sun, such as thermal, photochemical, and photoelectric, indirectly from the sun, such as wind, hydropower, and photosynthetic energy stored in biomass, or from other natural movements and mechanisms of the environment, such as geothermal and tidal energy. And we talk a lot about sustainability. One way to define this is that it is a condition in which the demands placed on the environment can be met without reducing its capacity to allow all people to live well in the present as well as in the future. This was also touched on by Mr. Rafi from the financial perspective earlier on. Now, the reality is that we are very much playing catch-up. Science and technology is advancing rapidly. The progress is tremendous. And when it comes to ethics, how to use science and technology responsibly, ethics always plays catch-up with science. The progress is so fast that it is impossible, almost impossible for us to really address all the ethical concerns that crop up from this science and technology development. Mr. Rafi talked about ethical financing in a way to ensure sustainability. I think it is also important for us to be aware that when it comes to science and technology, we also need to be ethically responsible. Research and development have to go hand in hand with integrity and responsibility. I'll talk about this more shortly. Okay, I like to focus on energy consumption. Today, we live in a world where it is, it is impossible for us to live without using energy. We use energy for electricity, we use energy for heat, we use energy for transportation, for computing, for food preparation, for communication, and for many other reasons. And this happens without us actually realizing it. Many of us just use energy as if energy resources are infinite, as if it is something that we can use without thinking that it has its concerns. Now, if you look at the main energy resources of the world, the fossil fuel is the main source of energy that we use today. I think that is something that we are very much aware of. And in terms of energy consumption, the red-colored area are the areas where, or the countries where the use of, or the consumption of energy is very high. This trend has been going on for the past 15, 20 years, and we see that the amount of energy consumption increases every year. Industrialized nation, by the year 2025, it is projected to be around, I think, about 48%. And the developing world, including our part of the world, is also going towards that number. It's getting nearer to industrialized nations' figures. In terms of forecast, most of the consumption comes from liquids and also gas and coal. But essentially the trend that we see is that all types of fuel that we use is increasing. Now, we know that this is not sustainable. This is something that needs to be looked at seriously, because all these resources are not infinite. They will run out eventually, and fossil fuel, petroleum, coal, and natural gas, they will eventually run out as they are finite resources. Some say in the next 10 years we will run out of petroleum. That's why we see the oil and gas companies actively looking at new oil fields. But one option that we have is to look at renewable energy, solar, wind, and also hydro. In terms of solar energy, there are a few types. One is concentrated solar power systems, and the other is photovoltaic system. And they can be used either at a small scale or a large scale. Small scale meaning we use them at our homes, or large scale in terms of having solar fields. Now, this picture is actually taken in Malaysia. Does anybody know where that is? No idea? Okay, this is a solar field in Malacca. Okay, in Malacca. This is a solar field owned by this company, Gading Kencana Green Solar. Gading Kencana. The Green Solar Complex includes a solar farm. With a capacity of 8 megawatt with 20,092 solar panels located on a piece of land with an area of 14 acres. Okay. This is the world's most efficient solar farm with the capacity to produce 1 megawatt of energy per 1.5 acre compared to 1 megawatt of energy per 5 acres in other solar farms. Okay, so that's solar farm. Moving on to wind power. This is something that we have in abundance in Malaysia, and yet we seem not to actively look into this. We can generate power from the wind. I think that is something that we all know. The benefits of wind power is that it does not require much space compared to, say, a solar farm, and the surrounding land can be used for other purposes, and it is also economically viable. But again, wind harvesting, harvesting energy from the wind is not something that is common here in the country. What is common though is hydropower. Okay, we have this in the country. Essentially, when it comes to hydropower generation, we build dams, which is used to generate energy. And water is I like to use this example, the Three Gorges Dam in China. Okay, this is essentially the world's biggest dam for hydroelectric. It can produce 25 million. It can produce energy equivalent to 25 million tons of crude oil, 50 million tons of coal, and 15 nuclear power plants. The equivalence of energy produced there. Some people call it the Great Wall across the Yangtze. Okay, if you look at the slide there, that's the picture of the dam across the Yangtze River. And the difference between 1987 before the dam was built and 2006 after the dam was built. So it is a huge energy resource for China. It is the world's largest power station with an installed capacity of 22,500 megawatts. Okay, I'd like to move on to another renewable energy which is very controversial, and that is nuclear power. Okay, in terms of nuclear power, we can derive energy either from fusion or fission reactions. I will not go into the technicalities of this. I like to move on to the fact that 16 to 17% of electricity in the world is produced from by nuclear fusion. And the biggest nuclear power producer is France, followed by other countries. And Malaysia is one of the countries that is thinking of going into using nuclear power in the coming years. If you look at nuclear plants, there is a typical picture of a nuclear plant, and many people are scared just by looking at that because you see white smoke on it. It's not smoke, it's actually steam. Okay, water used to cool the nuclear power plant. If you remember the Fukushima incident, you see white smoke coming out. That is actually steam, not smoke. Yeah. Well, this is the how the schematics of a nuclear power plant looks like, and you have a nuclear fuel cycle. How we mine uranium and then we convert uranium to UF6 and then it is enriched and a whole lot of it until energy is produced. But always the concern has been contamination. Okay, how do you contain the contamination produced through by nuclear fuel cycle? And this has always been the concern. I think in Malaysia, this is also the biggest concern. How do we ensure that there is no leaks, or how do we ensure that the byproducts of nuclear power generation do not contaminate our surroundings? Until and unless this issue is addressed, I think many people will have reservations with regards to using nuclear power. Now, the thing is, I think most of us use energy without thinking about how energy is produced. And because of that, we use energy in a rather unsustainable manner. Yeah? We don't think much about energy until the point when we actually find ourselves without electricity, for example. Yeah? Then we make a lot of noise. Okay, we call TNB, we complain. Okay, but we don't actually think much about how TNB gets its energy from. Yeah, so if we think about this, perhaps we would have the responsibility to ensure that we use energy in a more sustainable manner. When it comes to sustainable development, I think it's important that we look at the concept of this. In terms of history, it is derived, in terms of the word, it is derived from the German term, which I do not know how to pronounce. Okay, essentially it is translated into sustained yield, which dated back to 1713, used in the field of forestry. And this concept of sustainable development essentially tried to strike a balance between resourceful consumption, which is logging, and reproduction. In the modern context, the word sustainable was first used in 1972 by a group of scientists from MIT in looking for a model output that represents a world system that is, one, sustainable without sudden and uncontrolled collapse, and two, capable of satisfying the basic material requirements of all its people. And sustainable development can be understood to be a pattern of economic growth in which resource use aims to meet human needs while preserving the environment so that these needs can be met not only in the present but also for future generations. And the focus of sustainable development is to meet today's needs while ensuring the future generations' needs are met as well. And this includes energy consumption. I'd like to quote the definition as used in the modern context taken from the UN's Brundtland Report in 1987. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I think this is something that we have been repeating again and again, driving home the point of the importance of ensuring that we do not sacrifice our future generations' ability to meet their needs based on the limited resources that we actually have. Two key concepts of sustainable development is outlined in the UN's Brundtland Report. The concepts of needs, which is priority should be given to the world's poor population, and the concept of limit, the ability of the environment to meet today's needs and the future's needs. Now, oftentimes when we talk about the environment, we forget that there is a limit to the usage of the resources provided by the environment to us. And that's why when we talk about sustainable development, it's often the question of whether to put the horse first or the cart first. Which comes first? Do we focus on sustainability first before we talk about development? Do we talk about development only then we think about sustainability? Or do they come together? Okay, this is essentially, I think, the essence of focus of discussion that we need to look at, because in many cases people think about development first, only then after we have a certain catastrophe or we are faced with a negative situation, only then we'll think about sustainability, and by then it is often too late. So I think sustainability and development has to come hand in hand. We talk about reducing carbon footprint, and yet the irony is we are the ones that are using a lot of energy, producing a lot of carbon, releasing them into the atmosphere, creating the greenhouse effect, resulting in global warming. We talk about the bauxite mining in Pahang. Okay, many of us are very much against it. We don't agree with what's going on. And yet, the reality is, if there is no demand, there will not be any mining, there will not be any production. Now, let me ask you, the audience here in this hall, how many of you here do not use a handphone? Please raise up your hands. I'm sure everybody here, I'm very sure, I'm very certain that everyone has a handphone, correct? Yeah. We rely on handphones. Okay, that is that has become a part of our lives.
We live.
We cannot live without a handphone, and this is the reality. And yet, how many of us actually realize that the handphone casing is made from aluminium, which is derived from bauxite? We never knew about that. We never think about it. We protest, we don't want bauxite mining, and yet at the same time we are the ones demanding for more handphones. So consumption drives production, and we are the consumers. We have a role to play. That's why we talk about green practices. So if there is no demand, there will not be any production. So I think that's one thing that we have to always bear in mind. We like to blame others, we like to blame the industrialists, we like to blame the miners, we like to blame the government, and yet at the end of the day it always starts with us. Yeah? We are the ones that drive the demands. Consumerism. Yeah? Bauxite is also used to produce aluminium for shells and cases of consumer electronics, and also for household items, our cooking utensils, our watches, all use casings that are produced from aluminium, and aluminium is from bauxite. Bauxite is a rock. It's not a mineral. Aluminium is a mineral. Okay. Now we have to understand that in Islam, protecting the environment is something that is compulsory. Causing environmental destruction is a sin, as it results in imbalance and disharmony. We can look at various verses in the Quran that states that warns us about this. And as mentioned by Mr. Rafi earlier, essentially we are a trustee. The environment is a trust given to us to manage and to develop, but the key word here is to develop sustainably. For mankind to continue and prosper and life to be maintained, the environment must be looked after. But then again, let's look back at ourselves. Do we actually practice this? Okay, when we take our wudu, do we waste water? Most of us do, because we live in a country that is blessed with abundance of water, and yet when we open the tap, we just let it flow, waste the water away. And this is something that is in essence a sin in Islam. This is something that we have to be, aware of, mindful of, and try to change. As I said earlier, most of the problems lie with us. It is us that needs to change first, from the individual to the family to the community, and then only it can result into a snowball effect that can affect the whole country. One problem that we have is this syndrome, the frog in the pot syndrome. Okay, we talk about global warming, and yet many of us seem to be oblivious about it. We seem to be living in a denial, in a state of denial. We know frogs are amphibians. They are cold-blooded. If you put them in a pot filled up with water, you raise the temperature, say 2 degrees or 3 degrees every minute, they will not feel the change, because the body temperature will rise according to the surrounding temperature, until eventually it becomes too late. This is a syndrome that we are having as humans with regards to global warming. We are experiencing an increase in temperature, global temperature, and yet some of us, including President-elect Trump, do not agree with this. He says that global warming is a myth, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah? It's the imagination of scientists. Yeah? So this is something that we have to also tackle. Now, I've presented this before at another program, but I'd like to share this again. When we talk about practices, it comes back to us. We often talk about the 3R. Yeah? Reduce, reuse, recycle. Now, I'd like to stress I'd like to stress something about this diagram. In many situations, we often start with recycle. Okay, but if you look at the pyramid, it has to start with the bottom, from the bottom. We have to reduce first. And then, whatever that we cannot reduce, we try to reuse. After that, only we recycle. Okay, if we start from the top, then our efforts will be in vain. Yeah? Some articles I've read also have put another 2 R's, so now it becomes 5R. Okay, we have to refuse from buying in the first place. If we don't need, then we don't buy. so that we won't waste the things that we tend to buy. So we refuse ourselves from buying things that we don't need. We reduce the usage. We try to reuse whatever we can. We try to repurpose. If we can't reuse, we try to repurpose the things that we have. And finally, only then we'll go for recycling. I'd like to add another 2 R's, if I may. Okay, and that is, we have to start with respect to the environment. Okay, we have to have respect to the environment surrounding us, and then we have to rethink our actions. Okay, the things that we do, we have to rethink them carefully, and this is the 2 R's that I added on to the 5 R's early on. So if we can have respect to the environment, rethink our actions, then inshallah I believe we can try to inculcate a lot of green practices into our lives. If we look back at the way the traditional Malay people live in the past, they actually practice this, green practices. It's part of their life. Yeah? If you look at the way they build houses, the traditional Malay houses, we don't need air cons to make it cool. The design is such that they are built as part of the environment. They plant trees around their gardens, in their compounds. The trees are multi-purpose. They are used as a source of oxygen. It is also a source to cool down the air. It is also a source of food. So these green practices have always been there in our community, and yet somehow because of modernization it has been lost. So that's why I think in conclusion we have to ensure that the energy that we use today does not endanger the needs of future generation. We have to be aware that the resources are not limitless, and proper planning is needed in order to ensure sustainability. And sustainability must also take into consideration the intangibles, that is the moral and spiritual dimensions. For Muslims, Maqasid Sharia, I believe, should serve as a framework for ensuring sustainability. And we are also aware that when it comes to Muslims, we have a three-dimensional relationship. One is between man and Allah, and the other is between man and man, and the third is between man and the environment. If we manage these three relationships well, I think we will be able to carry out the task as Khalifah more effectively and more efficiently in accordance to the needs of the Sharia. We can have all the renewable energy and green technology that we can utilize, okay? But at the end of the day, without green practices, there will always be wastage. We can design an environmentally friendly building, but if we do not have green practices, then we will still, waste the electricity there. We can have green mosques, yeah? But if the Jama'ah still waste water, it does not mean anything at the end of the day. So I think this is the take-home point, if you like, that I like to drive home, that there is this need for us to be aware that we need to inculcate green practices within ourselves, so that whatever technology that we have can be beneficial and can be sustainable for future generations as well. With that, I end my presentation. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.